Hello and welcome to Profiles in Risk. This is your host, Tony Cañas, and today I have with me the one, the only David Gritz, co-founder and managing director at Insurtech New York. And should I also say partner at Startup Owl? Is that still accurate?
Startup Owl is our corporate name, so
Oh,
like
okay.
incorporated under that.
So it's really co-founder and managing director at Insurtech New York. I should have known since they both have the same dates on LinkedIn, and I didn't think of that.
Yes.
So David, such a pleasure to have you on. I am kind of blown away that we have not done this before, because we definitely run in the same circles, where I am kind of the mascot and you're kind of like one of the wise younger men in this group. Because I didn't want to say wise old man because we're probably about the same age, but definitely like I love what you guys are doing with Insurtech New York and the many side activities to it, or they appear to. Okay, so we are missing Tony Liu today, your co-founder, but he's here in spirit. And the main reason we're chatting today is about the MGA Lab, which is one of the projects from Insurtech New York. And for the listeners, we are recording on July 1st, which is literally a couple of days after the end of spring conference season. So if we both look exhausted, is because it was busy. And mine actually started at your conference. My spring conference season, I came back all the way from Argentina, where I spent the last year, and I had never made it to an Insurtech New York event. And it just so happened that I set myself like we got back on a Saturday, signed our lease on a Monday, moved in on Wednesday, and then Insurtech New York was like the next Tuesday. So I took advantage of being in Atlanta and took a quick flight into LaGuardia. And I've got to say, I was very impressed with Insurtech New York at the Chelsea Piers. How many times have you guys done a significant in-person event? Is it
So that's our third in
okay?
person.
Mm-hmm.
That spring conference series we technically started during COVID. So
Okay.
we had two of them in COVID that were virtual, and those were, three in person, two at Chelsea Piers and one at Marriott Marquis.
Okay, and then there's been a few like smaller Insurtech New York local events kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, more than a few. I mean, basically, we do between 6 and 8 events a year, and then most of them are in New York. We have done a fair number under the Insurtech SF brand in the Bay Area, couple in partnership with Plug and Play, and then, of course, with Stacy, we do our experiential events. So Insurtech Trails, Insurtech Slopes, and Insurtech Rapids.
I did not realize that. I did not realize that was Stacy Brown and you guys. All right, in the experiential events. Okay, awesome. And Insurtech, so there's a lot of local Insurtech groups. And then there's Stacy Brown group that runs like 6 of them around the country, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And growing. I actually joked with Stacy that the first thing I'm gonna do later this week, before I put together a complete video about my travels this spring, is a quick video with all the selfies I took with him and with where on the map, because I basically chased him around the country this spring, and it was a lot of fun. Okay, so the different local Insurtech groups are very different from each other, and I would say that New York is probably the most robust for looking in from the outside, right? You guys have the accelerator, you guys have lots of events, and now you have the MGA Lab. Also, weren't you guys involved with the survey to
the
carriers?
Insurance Collaboration Index? Yeah.
Is that going to be redone every couple of years, or was that a one-time thing?
Not in its current instantiation. We're working on a different research with Conning that is going to be a playbook for insurers on innovation. We've
Beautiful.
already done 18 interviews, so that's going to be coming out later this year. And then we're kicking off a new project for some research on MGAs that I'll have more to share with you in probably about a month or so.
Perfect, perfect. And then you also co-authored a book with Brian Falchuk, if I'm not mistaken.
That is true. Yeah.
And the, the you guys did your own audiobook, right? Like your sections of the book are in your voice, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Awesome. Big fan. It's the book is really good. Is that The Future of Insurance Volume 4, I think?
Volume 3. Volume
Vol
4 is the Asia Rising.
Okay, Volume 3. Fantastic. All right. Okay. So the main thing we want to talk about today. What is the MGA Lab?
Great question, Tony. So the MGA Lab is a program to help startup MGAs go from where they are today to the next level of their evolution. And that typically means for MGAs that are just getting started to go from initial concept or evolution to first policy sold, or if they're in market in Europe or the UK, to start selling their product in the US or North America in general.
Okay. Spent to the US or North America. Taking taking notes like a banshee. Okay. So MGAs are a really interesting animal. My background, I'm a carrier guy. I'm a carrier guy who accidentally ended up being the mascot of the Insurtech world. I've never worked at an Insurtech or a brokerage or an MGA. I'm a former carrier underwriter. Uh, I have my CPCU, and I swear that back in my day, I feel like I should have a cane when I say that. Back in my day, I swear that CPCU had like 2 paragraphs on MGAs and 1 question in the test, kind of thing. And basically, what they taught us, if I remember correctly, was an MGA slash MGU. I mean, they try to teach us the difference with those two, which I've never been able to get my head around. But basically, an MGA slash MGU holds the pen. Basically, they're not a carrier, but they are an agency that has at least some programs where they have underwriting authority from the carrier where they can actually bind that business. Okay. And so that was my understanding of MGAs. And then the Insurtech revolution of the last 10 years happened. And now we have tech first MGAs coming out of the wazoo, right? And it makes sense to me because it takes a lot less capital to start an MGA than to start a full-on carrier, right? And many of those or some of those will eventually become carriers, but they're starting as MGAs. Am I halfway correct in my quick description of what is an MGA and why they've become so popular?
Yeah, I think you're spot on.
Thank
So
you.
I think for those in the audience that are still learning about MGAs, the way I like to think about it is insurance carrier has 3 jobs. Job 1 is distribution, finding consumers or businesses to buy your product. Job 2 is your expertise, Tony, underwriting, pricing the product in a way that you can produce underwriting profit. And then the third is managing risk capital or managing a balance sheet. So ultimately, carriers have a decision. They can either do it all themselves, they can, as most commonly, do the underwriting and the balance sheet themselves and outsource distribution to independent agencies. Or in the case of MGAs, they can actually just focus on the balance sheet. So they outsource the distribution and the underwriting to an MGA, and then they just lend their balance sheet. And this configuration can be very effective in a lot of cases. Let's say they're entering a new market, they want to take advantage of new technology, it would be too expensive to build themselves. Or in some cases, they're concerned about channel conflict, and their independent agencies would be very unhappy if they ultimately were competing against them, even if it's a completely different market segment. So having an MGA partner gives them an additional layer of separation so they can maintain the right relationships, because ultimately the independent agents can still work with the MGA in the new market segment and the new product area.
Okay, perfect, perfect. Now, one thing that I'm still confused about, have MGAs become just exponentially more popular in the insurtech era? Or is it just that they were outside of my purview since I was a career underwriter?
So let me just give you the general data that we have. So Conning Research did a report a couple years ago about the state of MGAs, and there's statutory requirements filed for MGAs. Usually, I believe if it's over either 5 or 10% of the carrier's risk pool, that has to be included in the filing. So based off of that, Conning found there's roughly about 600 MGAs that have to meet the statutory requirements. They then estimated there was another 350 plus, or maybe 400, so we'll call it 1,000 overall if you round up, of traditional MGAs. Based off of the research that we did just a few months ago, there's roughly 200, or somewhere between 200 and 225 startup or technology first MGAs in that universe.
Okay.
So they went from almost zero, in 2010 as a proportion of MGAs to now, 20%.
Okay. So yes, the numbers seem to back up my gut feel that there's just a lot of MGAs. Okay. Um, okay. So ultimately, an MGA makes sense if we have specialized underwriting expertise or specialized technology that should result in better results for a particular type of business. Is that
Exactly. And
okay?
sometimes the technology is an enabler. In other words, the policies are so small or so specialized that it would not be possible to write them without the MGA's existence. So this could be things like warranty for small e-commerce businesses that don't have enough aggregation to be worth the time for the carrier. It could be parametric policies, like we had a company in a previous cohort called Sola, where their average policy is under $100. Or it could be embedded insurance, where, in order for the insurance policy to be sold, it's embedded within another transaction. It could be, a real estate transaction, or it could be some type of transaction where, multiple parties need to have that insurance as part of their relationship.
Yep. So how does the MGA lab work?
So essentially, the MGA lab has four essential components to it that helps the startups go from where they are today to, next evolution in the market. The first is we have a robust mentorship program, and we firmly believe that, a lot of people complain about Insurtech 1.0 didn't make a lot of money, didn't have profitable underwriting. If they would have had the tools and pieces in place to be successful that the MGA lab provided, I think we would be talking about Lemonade and these other insurtechs a lot differently than we do today. So having experts to help the startups is probably only possible because we're, 5, 6, 7 years into this evolution. So every startup in the program is assigned an underwriting mentor, an actuarial mentor, a legal mentor, and a program mentor, which is someone who's, grown a digital MGA in the past. So that's component one. The other three components are all about the parts of the journey. So the first part of the journey is getting the model right. So we have a day dedicated to helping the entrepreneurs to understand their underwriting guidelines, how to create an effective actuarial model that's defensible, how to have predictable policy wording. One of the biggest challenges with a startup is they don't have in-house counsel, or most of the time they don't have in-house counsel. So they don't have the expertise to be able to draft policy wording that can survive through litigation. But, the mentors in our program have that experience and can help them with that. And then, the program mentors also tie into this whole process of thinking strategically, right? Is it better for you to start as admitted? Is it better for you to start as an excess and surplus lines product? If you're admitted, what states do you start in? what line of business are you? And it's funny concept about what line of business you are, because you would think, wow, like it's so obvious. If I'm pet insurance, I'm inland marine. But depending on these newer areas, that may be a different consideration. You might be a warranty company. You might be selling as a clip. You might be selling as a membership benefit. And all of these have different implications to how you're regulated and how your policy works. The second component of the journey, and oftentimes I would say the biggest bottleneck for startups, is finding the insurers that will stand behind them to be their fronting carrier, or provide them with paper and licenses, and then their reinsurer. So we have a day in New York where the startups can meet reinsurers and fronting carriers, and then we also have a virtual day where we partnered with Lloyd's, where they can meet some of the Lloyd's syndicates.
Oh
Then
wow!
the
So
third,
keep going.
and then the third part of the program is all focused on distribution. So we have independent agents, aggregators, and global brokers that meet with the startups about distributing their product.
All right. So not only do you basically teach us how to build an MGA, give us a 3-level mentoring structure that covers everything, and then you basically sit us in front of uh, in front of potential providers of paper and reinsurance.
Exactly.
That is amazing. That so I've never done it. I right, like half my friends are founders. I'm not. I'm a recruiter, a podcaster, and a former underwriter. Uh, but I've heard so many times how hard it is to get paper, how hard it is to get reinsurance. Uh, you're bottling it up.
Yeah, so one of the things that we do is not just doing it, but creating the dynamics for success. So
Okay.
there's 3 different dynamics for success that are really important.
Uh-huh.
First is having the right team around the founder at the moment that they meet the capacity providers. Because one of the biggest challenges is, if you're a founder and maybe you don't have 10 years of underwriting experience, or you're missing one component of your team, like maybe you haven't thought about claims. If you get that question, or you're sitting across the table from the reinsurer and they sense kind of a lack of credibility or a lack of expertise, that meeting is as well as done.
That
So
might have been
make
your own
sure you
chance.
have all the things ready. So either you can bring some of your mentors with you to the meeting, or you have all the pieces in place so that you're going to make that meeting successful. Second is, how do you create the dynamics of that meeting that is beneficial to the startup? Because usually everything is weighed against the startup in the normal methodology, right? So if a startup uses a traditional reinsurance broker, they can be very helpful, but oftentimes, because you're a startup with $0 in premium, you're not the #1 priority for a
Of
Gallagher
course.
or an Aon or Equinox Re. You're, somewhere between the absolute bottom and maybe a couple pieces of paper above the bottom. So by having the startups in person with the capacity providers, and if they choose to have reinsurance brokers, the reinsurance brokers are in that room too. So you have all these people in person that are there to support you. You're going to be much more likely to be successful if you have this in-person component. And then the last component is all about creating a competitive environment. So it's usually the opposite dynamic, where it's a startup submitting to a reinsurer, and the reinsurer has a stack of papers, and they're just one of the considerations. Because we have a selection process and we meet with the reinsurers to understand their needs, we essentially create a cohort. So when the capacity comes around, there's 20 to 30 reinsurers looking at 5 to 10 startups, opposed to a situation where it's one startup and then the reinsurer is looking at them compared to 30 other opportunities. So we're creating this dynamic where essentially the startup is the scarce commodity, they're vetted, and there's other reinsurers that are interested in the same potential business. So it's almost like for those of you who are familiar with the Target Markets Conference, it's like a private Target Markets conference just for a small set of startups that got into the program.
This is beyond fantastic. Like I'm guessing that between you and Tony Liu, you're the systematizer, and he's more of the salesperson. But I don't know that for a fact. But somebody designed this to be incredibly systematic and well designed, and it is really really impressive.
So Tony is also a systems thinker. He's the
Okay.
operations guy, and I'm kind of more the content guy. So I came up with the framework, but he figures out how do we do it in practical reality? Because getting 20 to 30 reinsurers to show up in our office on a specific day
Uh-huh.
is hard work. He does that. I figure out who should be invited.
Okay. Fantastic. Fantastic. Okay. So who should apply for the MGA lab? Like, what kind of background do they normally have, and what is the application process like and the vetting like?
Yeah, so there's three different, I would say, archetypes of startups that should apply or consider applying. First is a technology first startup that has a proprietary underwriting advantage. It could be a unique data source, a way of delivering the product that allows that product to be available, or some other technology. And ultimately, that will allow them to be a successful MGA. Second is a startup that's already a digital broker and they're selling and they want to own more of the value chain. So they might have aspiration one day to be a carrier. This is an intermediate step that we can help them with. And we actually have had one startup carrier in the program, so we're not opposed to startup carriers joining the program. And we do have a captive vehicle if you want to take risk. So that is something that's available. I don't want to say, you just can only be a digital broker and don't have aspiration to be a carrier today. We're okay with that and we can support that. Last is you already are an MGA in a different geography. You could be, in, Asia, you could be in Europe, you could be in UK, and you want to come to North America.
All right. All right. Um, so we apply online,
Yes.
answer your questions. What is your advantage? Or right? Why do
Yeah,
you
it's
think you'd be good
about,
at
I
this?
think it's 12 questions. It should
Uh-huh.
take no more than an hour, probably around 30 minutes.
Okay. And then we get approved, we don't get approved, or we get an interview, or what's the process from there?
Yeah, so basically the process has a couple stage gates. So first is application, we'll review it. If you pass stage gate one, then we'll invite you to an interview. We'll ask you for some follow-up documentation to help us get to know a little bit more about that. In the interview, we're trying to understand what is your pathway to premium growth? What is your proprietary underwriting advantage? What is your distribution model? And how is your product unique and interesting to your distributors? Then we take all that information back, we meet with a number of our capacity providers, and if we feel confident that there's likely going to be a match, then ultimately we'll do a kind of a couple final checks and then we'll invite you to be a part of the program. There's some documents that you have to sign, and then ultimately you're accepted.
Okay, perfect. How many cohorts have gone through it?
We've had two cohorts before. First cohort was 9 companies. Second cohort was 11.
Are you doing it once a year?
Yes.
Okay. When does the application start?
Applications are open now until July 12th, and the program starts end of August.
Perfect. Perfect. All right. Um, okay. What is the pricing? What is the revenue model? So basically, we get accepted. We sign the
Yeah,
agreement
so
for
the
100
cost for
grand
the
kind of thing.
startups to participate is 100,000 in equity at their current
Oh,
valuation.
in equity. Okay,
Yeah.
100,000 in equity. Okay. So now that's interesting. I'm I'm amazed that I kind of guessed the number correctly. I thought it was 100,000 in cash. So if it's in equity, how do we agree on the cap?
Yeah, so we'll just look at your previous round valuation. If you haven't raised any capital, we'll have some comparables, given that we know a lot of MGAs, that will be a reference point for us to get to.
Okay. Uh, perfect. All right. So 100,000 in equity. All right. So I guess it makes sense to wait a little bit if we're tiny, so that we have enough. But like is there such a thing as somebody comes in and applies, and you guys are like, hey, love the idea, but you're so small for now that the 100,000 in equity would be a huge percentage of the company?
I mean, I, I don't know if there's any specific point where we would say you're too early. Our preference is that you've built the technology first,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
so you are ready to launch as an MGA in the next 12 months. I
Okay.
think if your timeline is longer than that, then to your point, Tony, there may not be enough value you've created in the market to establish yourself. And theoretically, you could be giving up more equity than you might want to, but I think it's more we're focused on the readiness for the market. You need to be
Okay.
ready to be able to
Perfect.
launch in the next 12 months.
Perfect. How did you guys realize that there was a need for this? Because I'm guessing there's been nothing like it in the past. How did you realize that there was a need for this, and how did you realize that you were the right people to do it?
So we have been running our regular growth stage accelerator, now called Insurtech Match, for I think it was about 3 years. And we had a number of MGAs go through the program. And I always felt like what we did for them was helpful, but it wasn't as helpful as it could have been if we had a dedicated MGA program. There is a similar incubator in the UK called Insurtech Gateway. We had met the Insurtech Gateway team. They have a relationship with the regulator, the FCA, which gives them a sandbox. And ultimately, they are doing a similar thing to us in the UK. They also have a fund as well. So, we saw that model as a successful model in the UK. We also saw that, there wasn't really any group that had something similar in the US. I mean, there's target markets that you can go to as a conference. There's a bunch of different funds that have some ways they can help, like Greenlight Re can help you. Serious Point, when they were active, could help you. Accelerate, in theory, can help you, but it's not a comprehensive end-to-end program. So we interviewed a lot of founders that started MGAs, and they kept telling us, man, if you would have just existed when we were getting started, this would have been perfect. So the combination of our intuition that we got the feedback from running the growth stage accelerator that this was needed, the customer interviews, talking to the folks at Insurtech Gateway, all of those kind of points triangulated us to this was necessary. And then we used those, interviews with the founders to understand the most essential components, which is really, building the model, getting access to capacity and distribution. And those were things that we learned by doing, market research. I can't say I'm as much of a genius as, someone who's just completely created it out of thin air, like how Steve Jobs says, just ignore the customer. In this case, we actually listened very closely to the customer and tried to mirror the things that we thought were both timeline and cycle relevant to them, but also support to fill in all the gaps.
Perfect. Perfect. David, super impressive stuff that you guys have done with Insurtech New York and with the accelerator, and now with the MGA lab. Absolutely fantastic to be a spectator and a cheerleader to this happening in our industry. Thank you so much for your time today, and I very much look forward to continue to see you guys grow and grow our ecosystem. Look forward to see you in the fall at ITC and whatever other conferences we happen to do together.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.